Good evening, everyone. It is great to see everyone out here tonight for another exciting edition of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society's free public lecture series. My name is Scott Bradley. I'm the Executive Director of the Thunder Bay Museum. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight, including those joining us on Zoom. Please do use some polite language if you cannot hear the audio, and we'll do our best to make sure that the technology is working tonight. As you can see, the gremlins knew I was talking about them, and they have invaded the Wi-Fi tonight. I'm sure that'll come back up in a moment. A bit of housekeeping. If you have your electronic device on you tonight, please do silence it or turn it off so we don't interrupt our speaker. There is a restroom directly outside of the room on the right-hand side before you get to the elevator, and if that is occupied, there are some more down on our second floor. This lecture is being recorded tonight, so for those of you joining us online or those in the room, those joining online, we cannot hear you nor see you, so do not worry about the things you're saying while we're talking. So there are refreshments here tonight. There's coffee and tea and some food. So please do help yourself. We don't want the staff to be able to consume that later. And there will be time for questions and answers towards the end. I would like to yield the floor now to Elder Sheila Decor, who will start us off with some ceremony. Thank you.
Bonjour, Gakanawea. Hello, everyone. Nindishnakas Nibin Gimiwan, Benezi Wazasu and Mki Waju, Nindoji, Nisquatesi Nindodum. My name is Summer Rain. I come from the Thunderbird Nest of Thunder Mountain, also known as Mount McKay, in the community of Fort William First Nation, and I am Turtle Clan. But I'm also known as Sheila DeCourt. That's my birth name. And I want to say Chimigwich for the museum, Scott, inviting me to open this evening with an opening prayer and song and smudge. And I like to, I don't like just to light the smudge and without any explanation. I really think it's important to provide a teaching with what I'm sharing, because it's in the spirit of reconciliation. You know, if you don't really know and understand what it is that the First Nations people do when we come up here to do an opening, I like to explain it. So I'm going to light the smudge. But before, a protocol that is practiced is tobacco is offered. And that is offered to me in honor and respect of my sacred items in my bundle and for my knowledge and gifts that I'm sharing with you tonight. It was given to us by the creator of tobacco to be used in the way of opening that communication doorway between the physical world and the spiritual world. It was never meant to be used in the way that it is today in the form of cigarettes. It's used to, like I say, open that communication doorway. It helps guide the direction of this evening. And it's also used to give thanks for something that you might be taking from Mother Earth, for example. And you know, with it being hunting season now, there's a lot of hunters that are out there out hunting and harvesting moose. And so tobacco would be offered to that moose to give thanks for that moose for giving its life so that we can feed our family and use the hide to clothe ourselves with. And so I'm going to put a little bit of that in here, the smudge bowl. And so I'm just going to use the sacred medicine. So tobacco is one of our 4 sacred medicines. And then we have sage. It's considered a woman's medicine. I'm not going to use the other 2. And the last time some of us elders were in this room, we kind of set the smoke alarm off. Well, I didn't. So I just have a very small amount of sage that I'm going to use. I'm not going to try not to. And I'm not going to come around and smudge everybody individually. I'm just going to do the 4 directions But I like to explain what I'm doing. So we light the smudge, and then it's like we're cleansing ourselves, and so we're washing our hands. And then we bring up the smoke to our mouths so that we will speak kindly to one another. And our ears so that we will be able to hear the important messaging that we're about to hear tonight, and so that we can hear good things. And our eyes so that we will see the beauty in all of creation and see the good in people. And our mouth so that we will speak kindly to one another without hurting people. And then our heart so we'll be loving and kind to one another. And then we bring the smoke over the rest of our body to remove any negative energy that we might be holding on to, so that we'll be in a good frame of mind for what we're going to be learning here tonight. And then I'm going to smudge my drum, because I'm going to share a song with you as well. And made a little feast dish offering for the spirits, which I'll put out later. Let's put smudging in 4 directions. Bonjour, Getchimanaju, no Krisak, Nishonasak, in addition to cause Nibin Gariman, Venice Biennale and Doji, Squatese, and Dodo. KaaSheGaaBaaWeak, Miigwech Gamatkos. Miigwech, Miigwech, no Griskis, Mishonaskis. Miigwech Wabano, Shawano, Mika Babino, Gaydino. Miigwech, Nani Bijou, Anishinaabekwe, Miigwech Nibi Wabo. Miigwech student. Miigwech Mino Bedazzlement. Miigwech KaaSheGaaBaaWeak. Waiting on Ishkami. Miigwech. Miigwech for this beautiful day today. And the evening to gather with elders and members of the community here on this series. We ask for special prayers for those that might be suffering from illnesses or maybe grieving a loved one. We ask for special prayers for them. Miigwech. So what I said in the language was I was just doing land acknowledgements, honoring the 4 directions and our protectors, Nani Bijou, sleeping giant, and the water spirit that lives in Lake Superior, and Grandmother Moon and Grandfather Sun for all that they provide, and then Mother Earth for everything that she provides in the form of medicines. And thanks to our clans and for our way of life. The wind and the water that gives us our life's breath in our life. That's what I pretty much said in my language. So now I'm going to open in a song. And the song that I chose for this evening is a turtle song. And the turtle represents truth in the 7 grandfather teachings, and it helps guide the other 6. And the reason the turtle was chosen as the one to represent truth is because it's the longest living animal here on Turtle Island. And it represents Turtle Island, the turtle. And it moves in a slow and meticulous way, but it always knows where it's going. And it carries the teachings of time on its back, the 13 moons. You know, the regular 12-month calendar is 12 months, but there's actually 13 moons in a calendar year. And so that's what that turtle does. And it speaks about truth, the importance of the truth to boil with. And so the song translates into the eagle goes, because I'm being recorded now. The eagle flies over creation, over the waters, searching for the Anishinaabe, the people. And then the turtle will go with the eagle, searching for the Great Spirit to come and heal his people, the Anishinaabe. So now I will pass it back to you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Elder Sheila Decor, for being here tonight and starting us off in a good way. So I would like to now introduce tonight's presenter. Eladia Smoke is an Anishinaabekwe from Lac Seul First Nation with family roots in Alderville First Nation, Winnipeg, and Toronto. Eladia has worked in architecture since 2002, founded Smoke Architecture as principal architect in 2014, teaches as a master lecturer at Laurentian's McEwen School of Architecture, and serves as the founding member of RAIC's Indigenous Task Force. Eladia represented Canada at the 2018 Venice Biennale Unceded exhibition as part of an international team of Indigenous designers and architects. Her current professional work includes community-based institutional projects, working alongside Indigenous stakeholders, collaborating with First Nations communities, and listening closely to our elders. Eladia.
Thanks for the beautiful opening. I've never heard that song before. So it's really nice. And the smudge helps with speaking. I always feel really jittery until I get some smudge. So it's really good when it's here, because otherwise I just stay jittery the whole time. Bonjour, KaaSheGaaBaaWeak Indigenous, Obishikokaang and My name is Eladia Smoke. My home community is Lac Seul First Nation, or Obishikokaang. And I've got family on my dad's side in Alderville First Nation, on my mom's side from Winnipeg and from Toronto. And I currently live in Hamilton, Ontario, where I have my architectural practice and my delightful hubby and my itty bitty little min pin, whom I'm missing terribly, and my mom. I'm also missing a mom. But yeah, and what else about me? So Scott said most of it, and thank you, Scott. So I grew up near Sioux Lookout. That's where Lac Seul is. You're probably aware of where Sioux Lookout is as well. So it's sort of not on the res, not quite in the town, but out in the bush there. And so Northwestern Ontario really feels like home for me. So thank you so much for having me back. And thanks especially to Fort William First Nation, as this is their treaty lands. And of course, this is Anishinaabekwe Nation right here in the Great Lakes. And in fact, so is Hamilton. In Hamilton, we also have Haudenosaunee people. So it's been interesting learning from them as well, being down south. So that's been really nice. So we're on Robinson Huron Treaty lands right now. And thanks so much for the museum, for inviting me, Scott and the board. Really lovely to have spent some time with you. And I saw the wonderful lodge designed by Chief John Thunder today at Chippewa Park, and that was a real treat. I've never seen it before. So even despite working in Thunder Bay for a whole year, it's my first time seeing it, so that was wonderful. So this little clicker is, oh, there we go. I just have to be more masterful with it. All right. So here we are at Thunder Bay Museum. So big thanks to Thunder Bay for inviting me. So what I'm sort of calling, definitely the first part of this presentation, I've been calling it Wido Sendawuk, which is sort of we walk together, or step by step. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our process for embedding Indigenous perspectives into my own work. Some of this I've heard from elders, a lot of it I've been taught by Indigenous clients. So none of this is really my own knowledge. This is knowledge that's been gifted to me really generously by all the people I work with. And so big thanks to them also. So I wanted to share this resource with you, nativeland.ca. It's a great website. It's in constant refinement. It's a way, whenever you undertake an initiative, it's a way of finding out who speaks for that territory. So what nations call that territory home, and who are the caretakers and stewards of those lands. So here we are in what's currently known as Thunder Bay, and as you can see, it's Anishinaabekwe territory. And so I really highly recommend this to anybody who's undertaking a project of significance, to find out who to speak with. And oftentimes there's lots of overlap. Different peoples call that territory home oftentimes. Like that's the case down south in Hamilton where I've been living. You know, there were multiple overlapping nations, and the history is just as complex from pre-contact times as it has been since contact. So it's good to know a little bit about where you're working and who you're going to be working with. So here's some of the nations that call Ontario home. So the two main nations in Ontario as a whole are Anishinaabekwe Nation and Haudenosaunee nations. So amongst those larger categories, there are smaller categories of national groups. So Anishinaabekwe nations include, you know, Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and they form something called the Three Fires Confederacy. I'm not really a historian, but this is just what I've been told and what I've learned through research. There's also the Algonquin, up more around the Ottawa area, the Omama-Wininewak. Then, you know, even just a little bit further into Toronto area, that's Mississauga territory. And then, you know, Chippewa is sort of another name for Anishinaabekwe Nation. And then there's probably others that I haven't got listed here. Down south, we start to get into Haudenosaunee territory. So some of the Anishinaabekwe Nation territory also overlaps with Haudenosaunee, which includes the Six Nation Confederacy. I'm really proud. We've just got our very first Onondaga member in my office. We've all been Anishinaabeg up until now, so we finally got Haudenosaunee working with us. So that's a real treat. So she's teaching us about her culture. And it's always better if you can figure out the autonym, the name we call ourselves, whenever you're speaking with an Indigenous person, instead of just using the generic Indigenous. You know, that's pretty broad term. So it's nice to know who you're talking to, who you're listening to. This is a series of books that I always recommend. People, after I speak, they always ask me, oh, what books would you recommend? So these are 3 really good ones. The Mishomis book is a very seminal work. I suspect it looks like a kid's coloring book because of the school trauma. This is just my own personal viewpoint. They made it look very, very non-academic. But when you get into it, it's a very deep work. It's a deep philosophical work about Anishinaabe culture, Ojibwe culture, by Edward Benton Benai. The one critique I've heard of it is right there in the name it says Mishomis, that's grandfather. Now, Anishinaabe people will tell you that we really respect our women, and women often run everything, and that's how it ought to be. And so we don't see Nokmis in the title here. We don't see grandma. So that's one critique I've heard of it. Dr. Lawrence Gross, who's from White Earth, Minnesota, wrote this book, Anishinaabe Ways of Knowing and Being. And this is a highly academic work, very scholarly. He spent his whole life researching the culture, talking to many people, reading works that were written about us, as well as works and stories that are by us ourselves, and comparing them. And so it's a wonderful book, really, really good. And then if you're interested about Haudenosaunee, even though they're not really from around here, they're down south, there's this one, And Grandma Said, by Sagagwaniangwis, Tom Porter. Great book. And he named it this is because just before he published, his grandma visited him in a dream she'd passed on. And she said, okay, you've got to write down all the things I told you. You have to write them down in a book. And you're going to call this book And Grandma Said. So he's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So it's a great book. So those are some that I recommend. Now, if you're looking for architectural specific books, we now have some resources. We didn't before 2018. We really didn't. There was one book by Robert Easton and Peter Nabokov called Native American Architecture, and it's a classic. But it's a survey book. It's from all the way across the Americas. And so it wasn't any one specific nation. So like we had Anishinaabekwe and Iroquois, we had this 2 little pages, 10 little pages in this book, and not much. So now we've got some wonderful architectural resources. They just published in 2018 the Contemporary Handbook of Indigenous Architecture. That's a more global view, but it is edited and was edited by Indigenous people. We're on that editorial team, but including the fantabulous Daniel Glenn. Love that guy. He did a great job helping to edit that book. And Rebecca Kittle, along with Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart is Niska from the BC coast, edited Our Voices. And then they edited another one, Our Voices 2, in which I do have a chapter. So Our Voices 1 and 2 are also great architectural resources. So if you're curious to learn more. So let's see, I don't know that this clicker is working. I have a suspicion that you're helping me. No, you're not. It's just, it doesn't always listen to me. Okay, so one of the first things that we always do before we start any project is gain an understanding of how the project intersects with the mandates of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. I think this should be done for any project of significance anybody does anywhere in Canada and the US. I really think it's a good first step. See which check marks you can check off of the calls to action. And then the second thing is, how does it intersect with the mandates of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Because of course that's now been introduced into law in Parliament in Canada. And we actually have an obligation as citizens, as a country, to establish free, prior, and informed consent by Indigenous peoples whose territories are affected by the decisions we're making. So this is really important, and it affects all professions, all undertakings. So we need to start actively supporting reciprocal relationships, mutually beneficial relationships with Indigenous peoples and local First Nations in anything we do. We do this by connecting with local leadership and finding project champions, people who are directly benefiting from or have an interest in the project that we're doing, so that we can ask them to help us to figure out who should be called to the table, what questions should we be asking, what are the most important project's key success factors that we should keep in mind as we embark on this adventure together. All of this is to establish a dialogue so that we end up with culturally resonant spaces. Now, those spaces might be virtual spaces, they might be physical spaces, as in my profession, but those culturally resonant spaces are what we need in Canada right now. And I always say Canada has been struggling along on 3 legs. Now, those 3 legs historically have been Anglophone Canada, Francophone Canada, and New Canadians. And we've just completely missed out on our 4th leg, which has been here all along, Indigenous peoples. And we need that 4th leg to really be able to run. And I think once we start doing that as a nation, we will really get somewhere together. I really do believe that. So we do that through communication and establishing a strong framework for Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. So I'm going to go through a little bit of our process first, and then we're going to look at some exciting projects. I hope you'll find them exciting. I find them really exciting. This is my team. I just want to say a big shout out to my team. This is there's 3 people missing here. There's 2 co-op students who are joining us from Mohawk. Kelly Cooley and Wajma Sakti aren't shown here, and Meredith just joined us, Meredith Hughes, and so they don't appear in our staff circle yet, so it's already out of date. But we've got wonderful people from, our farthest east member is actually right here, Julie Bédard. She is Francophone. And we've got just most recently the wonderful Amina Lallard. She's our first Métis member. So we really try to have a diverse team, and I'm really proud of the team. They're such amazing women. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Indigenous design principles. Again, these are things that I've been taught by elders I've worked with, knowledge carriers I've worked with, clients that I've worked with, Indigenous peoples throughout Ontario, Manitoba, Quebec, and I'm going to speak largely for just Anishinaabe point of view because that's my nation, and so I don't want to speak for like Haudenosaunee or any other nations that I'm not a member of. So I'll just talk a little bit, and anybody in the audience who's also Anishinaabe, please feel free to correct me if you see something a little hinky, because I know every knowledge carrier I speak to gives me another facet of interesting perspective. So I hope that's okay to share with you today because I find these things tremendously exciting. Like, look at the possibilities when you invite Indigenous voices into our urban spaces. This project is by Reverie Architecture in collaboration with Salish, Coast Salish peoples in BC, and just imagine if our neighborhoods look like this. I mean, admittedly, it's still in concept design. In concept design, you're allowed to do all sorts of things, but but it's aspirational. I would love to live in a city like this. So, the realm of built environments is one where Indigenous people have been systematically excluded from for far too long, and all of us have, missed out on those benefits that could be brought from this type of looking at reality, this way of seeing the world. I think we need to start repairing and rejuvenating all of the damage that's been done in our urban zones, all the places where vegetation has not been loved and invited and help to thrive in our built spaces. So this is a rooftop garden in Toronto that was done by Native Child and Family Services. You can see the 3 sisters here and the beautiful contemplative spaces. And it's sort of done in a more naturalized and less formalistic way. So the edges are soft. You feel like it's alive. So even though it's in this dense urban zone, it still feels comfy with all the friends and relatives around us. Another way we connect with our friends and relatives, Nidinoy Maganadak is one name for that, it's Solar Relations, is these outdoor knowledge sharing spaces. So these are a couple that we designed. The one on the left here is with Credit Valley Conservation. authority, and they formed an Indigenous stakeholder group to work with us on this. From Mississauga's the Credit First Nation and some other very knowledgeable people who knew a lot about plant life. And this is a crane gathering space, so it's meant to look like the wing of a crane reaching out to the water. And the sort of the tripod structures are inspired by the fishing weirs that we had around this area. And those fishing weirs actually created fish habitats. So while they actually were made for fishing from and netting fish and sort of redirecting fish to flow where you wanted them to go, they also enhanced the actual ability of fish to spawn. So I thought the fishing weirs were a wonderful way of representing a connection to water that we're starting to rediscover. And of course, they sort of stand in the water just how a crane stands in the water too. So those are some of the meanings behind that one. This one's from Queen's University. They asked us to do sort of an outdoor classroom space. And this is kind of loosely built on the wigwam structure. Kind of, you can see that inspiration there. And the idea is that it can protect you from rain, because they say it rains all the time in Kingston. We need something to keep the rain off. So this is a couple of sort of spaces to reconnect with our relations. Another thing that I've noticed is we have a very particular material culture. Anishinaabeg material culture, you'll see, the ribbon skirt. You'll see, tensile structures like beaver tail snowshoes, using bentwood and, sinew or hide in tension, the birch bark or wheat floss basket and beadwork. So these are some examples of things that we made, and you'll notice that the things that we make kind of have a pragmatic element to them, where we're using materials that are readily available to us and putting them together in really beautiful artisanal ways. But further than that, every time I've sat down with a knowledge carrier or an elder who's doing an artisanal work, I find that there's these intricate teachings that go along with every aspect of putting together this artisanal work. And those teachings are actually almost part of the core point of making, of creating these objects. And so I kind of think the same thing about architecture, like when we're making architecture, the stories that we tell, the stories that we're embedding into that space are core to why we even make the space in the first place. And then that space is going to allow that story to continue as people continue to inhabit the space. So these are a few examples of those types of spaces. Wood is another really big part of our material culture. And the more close we can get to the actual just tree, the better. So less processed, sort of peeled logs are sort of favorite thing to see. This is a work by Turo, Brian Porter and Matt Hickey did this with Seneca College. And this is one that's in Sudbury. It's not by me, and I think it's, oh dear, I forgot the architect's name, I'm so sorry. This is one that I did and set with Dialogue at Centennial College. So this is just one view of one part of the building. The building actually has all these stories embedded in it, but I'm not going to talk about that project today. Here we have an example of some of the tensile structures that we see. Now the teepee is a Plains Cree form. But we also use it around here because it's been so optimized. It's such a convenient form to put together, and it sort of relies on this hide or canvas covering kept in tension to keep it strong. And of course, the snowshoe relies on that bentwood structure. So when you bend wood, it introduces stresses, it pre-tensions the wood, and increases the strength of this skinny little member. So you see that in our architecture as well. The qualities of bentwood, which use very little material, but really use it to its best effect. Same with the drum making. So you use the hide or the sinew, and you tension it, which keeps the ring in compression, the cedar ring of the drum in compression. So it's really interesting how the interplay of materials becomes sort of an expression of their best I guess their best qualities. Oh, we're waiting for connection.
So the TV is becoming a very pan-Indian
Yes.
concept, right? Which is
It's
why
also deep.
precisely.
Yes, it's so easy to put up. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a Plains tree or a Plains peoples, and they use it for actually a very specific purpose. It was sort of more of a hunting structure. Yeah, around here we have conical wigwam, which we'll talk about a little later. Yeah, which is different. It's a different structure. So artisanal inspirations that we've used in our work and are very, resonate with a lot of folks that we've worked with. That include that bead work, this quill work, and wampum. So each of these have all sorts of teachings embedded in them. You look at the graphic nature of these, and it's like, oh, how powerful the design is, so beautiful. But actually, there's all sorts of meanings woven into all of these, even through the production process of producing these. So some of the principles that I've heard people talk about is the 7 generations principle. So you think about 7 generations before you, 7 generations after you, and the needs of the present. So you're sort of thinking about everything that we've inherited from our ancestors, everything that we're doing that will impact our children and children's children after us, and the needs of us in the present day. We also talk about the 4 levels of existence. Haudenosaunee even have a whole Thanksgiving prayer where they do a shout out to all the life systems in the world, and it's really moving. It's beautiful. In fact, if you read "And Grandma Said," one of the chapters in the book is all about that Thanksgiving prayer, and it's just gorgeous. But Anishinaabekwe peoples talk about the 4 levels of existence, where we have all of the celestial creatures, Father, Sun, and Grandmother Moon, all the stars, and we have the creatures of the air, the air, the winds, all the birds that live there, the water systems, the atmospheric systems of the air. And then we have all the creatures who move on the earth, including us and all of our brothers and sisters who move around on the ground. And then we have our wonderful undersea and undersoil creatures who, take care of the water, take care of the soils, and they're so important. So all of these 4 levels of existence deserve our respect and consideration. And it is our responsibility to make sure that these systems thrive so that we can survive. And so that we can have a diversity and resilient life here on Earth. So this is another concept, the 4 directions. You'll often hear talked about, the 4 cardinal directions, but there's actually 7 directions that are often honored, including that sky direction, and the direction of earth, or KaaSheGaaBaaWeak, and the direction of self-center, or balance, where we have our heart, where we have our self, our sense of self. So each of these directions also has an intricate set of teachings, and if you ever get a chance to ask an elder about any of these concepts, you'll get a whole wealth of information to work with that will inspire the project you're working on, that may inspire your approach, because these all tie into an Anishinaabe sense of reality, what we believe is really going on. So this is the Mishona's teachings, and when we were working on Centennial College, the A building expansion, we also heard about the Noquemist teachings. So the Noquemist teachings are sort of the inward-looking aspect of these same teachings. So while the Mishona's teachings have to do with how you comport yourself in relationship to everyone else, the Noquemist teachings have to do with how we behave to ourselves, with our inner life. So I was really pleased to hear about these, because I've never heard about them before. And so when we asked, it was, he's passed on now, but it was Elder McEwen, and we asked him, what animal teachers might best represent the grandmother teachings, the Noquemist teachings? Because we'd heard the Mishona's teachings each have an animal teacher, an animal that best represents them, but we didn't know the grandmother teachers. And he said, well, what do you think? What do you think might best represent those teachings? And afterwards I thought, that is so interesting, because he was saying these have to do with our inner selves, our inner lives, and maybe that's why he told us to think about it ourselves. What does it mean to you? So for us at the time, Larissa and I, we talked about it, and we, wisdom was kind of the same, and respect was kind of the same, but then we started moving into, I'll just pull out a couple of them, preservation. We thought honey, they preserve honey and they preserve all of life through pollination. So what better to represent that? And then we thought about resilience. And if you've ever been talking to a Toronto person, you'll know that the coons are the most resilient critters in Toronto. They can hack the worst urban conditions you ever laid eyes on. So the raccoon was our best teacher for resilience. So how do we respect water? So water is another one of those life systems we really, really want to think about. And in our designs, we always try to think about those soft edges, those living edges. A lot of formal water designs from the past that you'll see have really hard edges. There's nothing living there between at the edge of the water, but that riparian zone is the most diverse zone you'll ever get. So when we think about interventions that allow you to have a relationship with water, you always want to make that alive, living, and full of life, and support those wonderful water creatures because they support the health of the water, and the health of the water supports us. Important plants may include things like maple and birch. Cedar are very important to us, and part of that is, of course, when we make our wigwams. The word wigwam actually comes from wigwas, birch bark. So we use those bentwood structures, introducing pre-tensioning into those little members. Very light and easy to carry around, super fast to rejuvenate, have very low impact on the forest when we harvest them, and you can make a house out of them, which is amazing. So sap, you can harvest sap from the maple trees also and make that wonderful sugar. Maple saplings grown under hemlock is actually what we used for a little lodge project at Laurentian University, which I'll talk about in a minute here. And when I made birch bark canoe with, it was also at Laurentian University when I was teaching there, and I learned that the making of the birch bark canoe, it's almost modeled on our own bodies. The cedar ribs are like our skeleton, and the cedar hand split sheathing is like our muscles, and then the birch bark is like our skin, and then the sap resin that you put on bear fat, sap and ashes is like our blood, and it seals all of those little cracks. And even the little spruce roots here that you use to connect the cedar to the birch bark, they're like our hands, hands grabbing. So it's amazing when you get into these artisanal works, all of the things that we make have these super intricate teachings surrounding them. And I just think that if our buildings were the same way, what stories could we tell in those spaces? And of course, the importance of mishkeke, the medicines. Almost everything's a medicine, I think. Almost everything has a purpose. And some of the main ones, which our elder here tonight talked about a couple of them. I think these are really important to honor when we think about any project, because the health of our medicines is very directly related to our own health. And even the word is wonderful to me. Mishke is strength, and Akit is the land, and so it's strength from the land. And that's what we mean by medicines. We'll get into the architecture now, which is probably what you were expecting me to talk about. So these are some of the key Anishinaabe pieces of architecture that we have used since pre-contact times right up until the present. We still use these forms, and these forms are still used for the very purposes they were always used for. With the possible exception of our wigwam, which we don't live in those anymore. more is a pity, but the rest of them we still use for the very purposes they were originally designed for. So this is your powwow arbor. Fort William First Nation did this right up on Mount McKay there, and I believe Two Row Architects helped them design that. So, which is Brian Porter and Matthew Key, wonderful guys. And so it's a beautiful arbor. Definitely, if you haven't seen it, go up and see it. I went up specifically to see it, and it's just a gorgeous place. Then the roundhouse is another architectural typology. The roundhouse physically expresses that sense of interconnectivity of all life by opening gates to all 7 directions. So you can see the 4 columns in the middle open to the 4 cardinal directions. The direction of up is honored by a skylight or a clerestory, a window up high. And then the direction down is honored oftentimes by an actual physical connection to earth, like there might be sometimes a little trapdoor, and you can actually touch the physical earth there. And then the center is where you put the drum. The big drum often goes in the space, so that represents the sense of balance, or the heart, and the beating of that drum brings together all life into its rhythm, into a shared rhythm of life. So the meanings behind this roundhouse structure are really rich. Even the act of meeting in a circle is significant, because when we meet in a circle, we are all on an equal footing with each other. We all have an equally important contribution to make to that circle, and we all have a responsibility to make that contribution. So that sitting in a circle actually becomes part of the teaching of the space. The sweat lodge is another form. It's what I've heard is it's meant to replicate the belly of a pregnant woman, because when you go into the sweat, it's like you're returning into the womb of Mother Earth to sort of reconnect and reground yourself. And there's all sorts of more teachings that I'm not going to mention today, but if you ever get a chance, do a sweat and hear some of those teachings, because that's the best way to learn them. And of course, the wigwam, which can be either a domed wigwam or a conical wigwam. So you can see it's called a wigwam because it's all clad in birch bark. So both of those were used around here. Then there's the teaching lodge. This is sometimes it's called a Medaligan, because it's one of those places where we learn Meday, which is the religion that Anishinaabekwe used, the more formalized version of the teachings. And that lodge is a wonderful structure because it's so ephemeral. The whole purpose of it is to feel like you're in the forest, because the forest is our greatest teacher. So I really do believe that the reason it's so ephemeral is because it's creating the least boundary between you and your surrounding life systems. It's just hinting at a building. So let's see if I can make this switch. Here we go. So I had the honor of visiting Manitoulin Island, the community of Chiging, and KaaSheGaaBaaWeak, which is their secondary school. KaaSheGaaBaaWeak took me through for a tour of their teaching lodge, which is also a wigwam. And you can see each of these panels was made with sinew from deer that they actually harvested in the community. The teachers and the staff and the students all got together to make this space. Each of the panels was done by, I believe, the students. So they hand split cedar shims. They sewed deer sinew so that the wigwas remained flat, and then they sewed that with sinew again onto the bentwood structure. So part of the glory of our pre-contact architectural traditions is that it brings people together into a shared endeavor. So it becomes a community building aspect. So the whole process of the conception of the space, the actual harvesting of the materials, putting those materials together, and then sharing the space is all about strengthening the bonds between community members and strengthening the bonds between humans and other than human life systems. Because every time we harvest any of these materials, we put tobacco, and as our elder said today, that's a way of communicating. So we put tobacco, we ask permission, we let the whatever we're harvesting, those plants, those animals, We let them know why we need their help, so that when we harvest that material, their good wishes come with us and are embodied into the space. So this is a very alive space. It becomes another member of the community. This lodge is alive. So we built one with, this is Joey Lynn Wabi. Wonderful to see her with her sledgehammer and her ribbon skirt. I find that image tremendously inspiring. And then we also built it with Art Patatagoose here, who, shared with us a lot of teachings about those lodges. And then Julie Pegamagabo. So Tikimishwishing First Nation near Sudbury very generously lent us access to their lands to harvest the materials. All the students went out and they put tobacco and they harvested a sapling, and we came and processed those and put them together into a wonderful bentwood structure, which maybe my clicker will help me show you. Maybe not. If somebody can hit forward on the slide, there we go.
She looks like a Beyonce lemonade with a baseball bat.
Nice. I would not have made that connection. Yeah, so as you can see, as you put together this lodge, look how happy they are. I love that. So as you put the lodge together, you latch it together at the junctures. You make the arches. Well, first you put the poles in the holes, and in the holes you put water and tobacco to make sure that the male and female aspects are together in the foundations of the lodge. And then you put the pole, and then you lash them together into arches at the top. Then you start putting the laterals, and as you put the laterals, it becomes its own scaffolding. So the more you build, the more you can build. And I think it's just so pragmatic. It's just like, hey, of course we're doing it this way. So anyway, it was such a wonderful experience. And they're still building it. Because it's a member of the community now, Laurentian University School of Architecture has taken this on. Every year they put on more birch bark panels. They're still doing it in collaboration with the Tikimishwishing First Nation. So it's still bringing community together, so I'm really happy about that. And if somebody could forward the slide for me. Yeah, so there just some more images. Now we use this wigwam structure as an inspiration for this concept of design, which we did with David Fortin and Wanda Della Costa. David Fortin's a Métis architect, and Wanda Della Costa is, I think, the first First Nations woman architect ever to have been licensed in Canada. And I am the second. She beat me. And Harriet Burdett Moulton was even before us. She's not status, but she's Métis from what is it? Montagnais. She says Montagnais Métis from the eastern part of Canada, but she's retired now. But we love her too. And we use this wigwam structure as an inspiration for this sort of bent structure that we placed around Indigenous people space right across from the parliamentary precinct in Ottawa. So Parliament is like over here where the lectern is, and Indigenous people space is in here. Now, as you probably know, they gave us an old Beaux-Arts building that was used as the national, the U.S. Embassy for the longest time. They kept trying to put things in, nothing would fit, and so finally they're like, okay, Indigenous peoples, you can have this building that's been vacant for 30 years. So what to do with it? Because it is a Beaux-Arts building, very hierarchical, really differentiated from the site that it's on, intentionally, right? That's the Beaux-Arts thing. And extremely colonial. And we're like, okay, so what do we do with this thing? So the first thing we did was we used the wigwam as an inspiration to create this domed glass structure over top of it, because the building envelope is in a shambles too. Like, it's got no insulation, and it's like the windows are ancient. It's just not even really quite a building anymore. And so we use these glass panels on sort of a bent structure to make almost like a display piece for it, like a vitrine. So it's like, this is how we used to do architecture around here. And, and then around that, we wrapped it with this beautiful regalia. So our elder Winnie Pitawanakwat said, you guys are like looking at this, you keep getting into the weeds, like, what did she say? You're just thinking too much. And she said, like, you have to think that this gift was given in really good intentions. Like, you have to think about this gift as like the intention that went behind it. And we have to accept this gift in the same spirit it was given. We have to honor the gift. So how do we honor a gift? I'm like, okay, well, we would wrap the gift with something. So we wrapped it with this regalia. This is this is meant to represent little handmade, I don't know, I thought bedwood, but across the nation we'll have all sorts of different types of artisanal ways of doing things. Little artisanal works that they can do by hand in our various communities all across the nation. And in a constantly rotating exhibit, so we hang these little things on this bedwood structure. And in this way, all of our nations are physically present here in Ottawa. And the other nice thing that this does for us is it creates an introductory space on the outside of the building. And so we kind of just like expanded the gift and kind of nudged over and kind of took that lot too. We figured it's a lot of design. You can get away with a lot. So we noticed that there was an axis, right? A very strong axis right to the center of the parliamentary buildings that went through the centennial flame, and then we're like, okay, we're gonna make an immemorial flame right here. We're gonna draw a line all the way across, and then this flame is where everybody gets welcomed. You get to come in here and see all the kinds of things we do, and seasonally, throughout the course of the year, different elders could come and share, what the types of things that we do in our own communities. From across the nation, we could get visiting exhibits, and when tourists come here, they can see a little bit of what we might be doing in our home communities. So, and when they're there, they get welcomed by this beautiful blanket that we've wrapped around the space. So maybe somebody could forward the slide for me. Clicker doesn't like me. And this is the space here. So even before you get in the building, and this is the east entry because that's the direction of sunrise. Even before you get to the east entry, there's this beautiful blanket wrapping around you. So you don't have the frowny face building anymore staring at you. Yeah. So I'm going to talk, this is the last project I'm going to talk about. I don't know how much time I've got left. How much time have I got left? Oh, we're good. We're okay. So this is McEwen, and it's cross-cultural center of excellence in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. So I figured you might like to see this because it's sort of like a northern Ontario space. They've got some boreal forest there, so it's a little bit close. And we're doing this with Moriama and Tashima Architects. We're working with Carol Phillips and the wonderful team there. So we're partnering on this, and it's been just a wonderful partnership. Next slide, please. I might have to just ask you to forward for me. So the inspiration for this space is Makwa, who's a medicine carrier, and they've invited the spirit of Makwa to support this facility. And when we were there the very first time, it was a very intense experience because this is right when they found all of those children in BC there, and everybody had left a memorial on the steps of this former residential school. And this former residential school, if you could forward the slide, has been the face of Algoma University for years and years. This is what you first see when you come to Algoma, is this former residential school. And in fact, this cenotaph was placed in the original location where the first residential school was founded. It's since been demolished, but this one still stands. And the survivors of that school, children of Shingwa, have re-inhabited the whole second level. This whole level is this beautiful exhibit, sharing their experiences in such a kind and gentle and gracious way. I mean, they've done a really good job, but it was still very intense for us. So next slide, please. This chapel is also on the site. This chapel, if you can imagine, including all of the stonework, all of the woodwork inside, was built by the children. And so they basically used slave labor to run the school and to build this chapel and to farm the farming fields behind the school. And the school would not have existed if it weren't for the labor of those children, because it was deliberately underfunded, and they couldn't have fed the kids at all if the kids hadn't been supporting themselves. So this chapel is also there, and there's something that both the chapel and the front entrance to the former residential school both share in common. And if you can advance the slide for me, it's this sense of being inferior. When you approach the steps, you're immediately like this frowny faced building with this great big shoulders, like looking down on you, and like you're made to come up these stairs, right? And the chapel does that too. It actually deliberately sends you down a few stairs just so you can come back up again and feel just a little bit smaller. So everybody had put their memoriams there, and if you can do the next slide. I left a couple of moccasins. I just thought it was, I don't know, just by happenstance brought these moccasins, and just by happenstance they had all this orange beadwork on them, and I'm like, this is where they are going. So that's where they stayed. Next slide, please. This is Crying Rock. So this is a really important site. This is the one place that the kids could actually speak their language and remember home, because they weren't even allowed to speak to their own siblings. They would get punished if they talked to their brother or their sister at this facility. And even if they had no other language, they weren't allowed to speak their language from home. They'd get punished very severely. So this is the only place they could go where somehow or other they were out of sight of the staff, and they could reminisce about home, hold hands around the rock, and just remember. So they call this Crying Rock, and nobody knew about it. They almost bulldozed it. Shane, the facilities manager, who's a lovely man, told us we were gonna fix the parking lot, because the parking lot's just got this raggedy gravel edge, and he said we're gonna fix it all, and then it rained, and I was like to the guys who were gonna come and bulldoze this rock, oh, you can't run the bulldozer on our grass when it's this wet, it'll tear it all up. And then he got a call. And he was talking, oh yeah, we're just about to bulldoze this rock. And they're like, you're gonna do what now? And he's like, yeah, we're just gonna, fix up the parking lot and get rid of that rock that's there. They're like, don't touch that rock. So it was just the rain, that it happened to be raining that day. That's the only reason it's still there. So we're gonna create a whole landscape feature around this to honor those memories of those children who found comfort with each other around that rock. So the next slide, if you don't mind. We're really freaking out the system here. And this is the forest in behind of the school. This forest is really lovely. There's a cemetery right through this forest, like in the background. And only the graves of the staff and important people at the school are marked, but they know there are unmarked graves of children. And there's actually a ground search to see if there are more graves that aren't known about. And the whole understory of the forest has been subsumed by periwinkle. Now, periwinkle is an invasive species. It's not from around here. It is really pretty though. And there's nothing inherently invasive about the periwinkle. But it is kind of obscured all of the rest of the understory of the forest, which is a really important part of the forest. So part of the plan is to remediate that forest understory and start to move the edge of the forest closer and closer and then into the campus. Next slide, please. So the inspiration of Makwa created the form of the building. So we thought about how Makwa moves through the forest, and because Makwa, the spirit of Makwa is that medicine carrier, we thought of Makwa moving towards the northern direction, which is that direction of elder, knowledge sharing, passing on knowledge to the next generation. That's some of the teachings about that northern direction. So we thought about that bear walking north. And we thought about the hindquarters of the bear, how it gently comes down to the ground, and the shoulders of the bear, how powerful they feel. And we thought, wouldn't it be nice if the people who visit this facility feel as powerful and as important and special as if they were standing on Makwa's shoulders. So that's the culmination of the experience for everyone. Instead of feeling little and small with the frowny face building staring down at you, instead of you're standing on Makwa's shoulders. Next slide, please. So that's the pathway that Makwa is taking towards the north. And north of the building is the whole rest of the campus. So it's really nice because the rest of the campus represents that ongoing knowledge sharing, in that elder direction. Next slide. The next thing that inspired us was the Tikanagan. So the Tikanagan is a representation of how important children are to us. We love our children, want to keep them safe, and that lacing inspired the major sort of moves in the building structure and on its cladding. So next slide, please. We're still hoping that the whole building can be mass timber. And usually mass timber is in a very strict rectilinear grid. It's like post and beam, really square. But with this building, we wanted it to be sinuous, like a braid, which I'll talk about in just a second. And to allow that to happen, that Tikanagan lacing is inspiring how we're doing the post and beam structure. So the actual structure is following the interlacings of a Tikanagan wrap. And then we reflect that too on the cladding as well. Next slide. So that interweaving of past, present, and future, this is a teaching that we got from a Chapaway's Cree Nation. It's one of the summer students that we hosted, and she shared this teaching that she got that the present is an interweaving like a sweetgrass braid, where we, next slide please, where we take a memory of the past, all the things we've learned from that, acknowledging the truth of the past, what our ancestors have figured out, what we can learn from what they have experienced. The future, the hopes that we have for the future, reconnecting with the natural world, new beginnings, life, and sharing with young people their energy and their inspirational way of thinking, and the needs of the present, what we need right now in the present day, and the experience of the present is never just the present; it's an interweaving of all three of these things, and so that's the shape of the building. Next slide, please. So we think about this all the way back to creation. So this is the lake there by Sault Ste. Marie. And we all came from water. That's the place of creation. And so when we think about the lake, we think about the beginning of all life. And then we think about all the possibilities of this foresty area here. And we think about how Makwa is walking towards the north, that place of knowledge sharing the rest of the campus. So we're bringing all of those thoughts together in this building. Next slide. And this is an image of our building over here. And can you just flip through the next few slides kind of quickly, like one after the other? Yeah, go ahead. So this is how we're bringing those masses together. Next slide. This is how we're lowering one side so that it feels like you're growing up out of the earth. Next slide, please. Then we create this sweetgrass braid. Next slide, please. And then we create the sense of a pathway of the present that partakes a little bit of a memory of the past and an acknowledgement of those truths, a hope for the future, how we're going to do better, and the needs of the present, what we're doing today to make that happen. Next slide, please. And then we put all that together. Next slide, please. And here we are with our 4 directions, which are really 7. Next slide, please. Our entrances from the west, where we have the spirit of Makwa right beside us there, and all of our plant relatives in this courtyard. So we gather strength from their presence before we encounter this historical building. And from the east, it creates a place of gathering. So this is where we reference the forest connection. The arbor they have, the ceremonial arbor where they have their sacred fires, is in that spot. Next slide. And then we have the connection to the rest of the campus off to the north, and a connection to this axis that leads us down to the lake, past the headmaster's house, past the chapel, past this new school educational space here. It's this axis that leads us finally down to the beginning of creation. Next slide, please. So we bring all of that together. So there's McEwen, our protector, helping us come to terms with having just seen this historical school, or else getting ready to go see it. And then this atrium where we see all of our relatives here in the west courtyard. This atrium where we gather, we can see what's going on the other levels. Next slide, please. And that's how we honor past, present, and future. Next slide. This was a very aspirational conceptual drawing. They told us when they saw this that there's no way that we can in Sault Ste. Marie take care of this many pathways on the roof. They're like, we have winter here, right? So this is much reduced, but it was a really nice idea. So this was representing the physical path of the present. Now we have a metaphorical path of the present. Next slide, please. Knowledge sharing. So there's a very fluid connection between indoor and outdoor learning spaces. We're making sure that there's an outdoor learning space that's landscaped for the purpose, and it connects very easily to the indoor classrooms. Because this is how we share knowledge, is we share knowledge with forests right beside us. The next slide, please. So there are these outdoor learning spaces. Next slide. And here you can see sort of diagrammatically how we're thinking of these spaces. So you can see that in this rendering, we tried to downplay this wall, which does exist, but trying to express the fact that the indoor and outdoor learning are going to be very fluidly intermingled. And the presence of water is also really honored. Next slide. So talking with our landscape architects, Eric Claver and Terence Radford, Terence is Métis, and it's been wonderful working with both of them. They're both very accomplished. There's this very significant slope down from here out to here, and there's a lot of water that happens in Sault Ste. Marie. And so we have sort of already this kind of swale that's been developed, and this is kind of squishy a little bit of the year. So we're kind of just going ahead and working with that. So we've decided this is going to be sort of a riparian zone. We're going to host, really nice riparian diversity along that little bit wetter bioswale. And then there's going to be a dry meadow and a wet meadow here to handle the site drainage. And that'll be part of the learning experience. Next slide, please. So you can see the sense of movement that we're trying to restore that understory, and we're hoping that the academics who are teaching in this space are going to be actively doing that, because we're going to create a little bit of green space inside so that they can sort of take plants in and out and actually have planting and harvesting and so forth as part of their teaching activities. Next slide, please. So bringing back that forest. Next slide. And the next slide is just in quick succession, if you don't mind. So this is the first move over here. So if you can just switch that slide for me, where we're sort of greening just right around our building, and we're hoping that Algoma will get really excited and they'll keep doing it. The next slide, please. Oh yes, there we go. So there we go. People are getting excited. And that next slide, please. And here we go. So then it keeps moving, and starts to take over the rest of the campus. And they don't have to mow so much. Next slide. And there, nearly the whole campus is filled, barely any mowing going on. All right, so next slide, please. So these are some of the key species that we thought, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but like Terence and Eric were very careful to make sure, okay, so we're really going to think about which understory plants we're going to bring back that can combat that, that can hold their own with that periwinkle. So next slide, please. Yes, so these are how the site will change season over season. So in the spring, you might actually get a little bit of standing water in that wet meadow. In the dry meadow, you'll get sort of this type of activity going. Then in the summer, we'll start to get a little bit drier, even in the wet meadow, and some of these beautiful flowering plants. And in the summer, this will be the drier meadow. And in the fall, we get this beautiful variegation of foliage colors. And then this is the dry meadow over here. Next slide. We're nearly done. And the privileging orange flowering plants, because orange is what we're all about right now. Next one. And of course, bear plants. This was a little controversial because they're like, do you really want to feed the bears? Weren't sure if that was the bestest of ideas. They've already got bears coming through. We're like, oh, the bears are blessing the site. That's good. They're like, yeah, the bears. Next slide, please. And so this is a drawing of the whole site all together. So you can see, you know, our connection to Shingwakal and Scott. So yes, this is where we're going to perpetrate the same horror that has been perpetrated at your facility, where we have half elevator stops. Because the heights of the floors over here aren't gonna match the heights of the floors over here, because here they're quite shallow and here we need the floor to floor to be deeper. And so we are going to have half stops to the elevator. So everybody will get lost here. But then they'll feel okay because they'll come out and they'll see this beautiful atrium, everything will be fine. So next slide, please. And yes, finally that knowledge sharing, gathering, next slide. We are envisioning like maybe seasonal structures happening in the sort of in the embrace of the building facing south, with the north and east winds a little bit mitigated. Next slide. This is the east entrance, sort of a vision down the atrium. So this is that west atrium. So you can see that we're really going to try and sort of screen the view over to Shingwakal, so you're not like, it's not in your face all the time. You get your wonderful plant relatives helping you with that experience. Next slide. This is the atrium itself. So as you come through the east entry, you're going to come here, and this is another east entry here, honoring that direction. There's the protector spirit of Makwa, the medicine carrier, who's helping you as you move out into the courtyard and encounter Shingwakal. And here you can see that Tikanagan lacing in the wood structure that's allowing us to do a little bit more curvilinear stuff instead of the straight ahead rectilinear post and beam that you typically see in mass timber. And of course, a circular gathering space, all those things that I mentioned about the circle. And of course, there's a kitchen right where you're all standing. You're in the kitchen, where you should be, because everybody loves to meet in the kitchen. So there's a teaching kitchen right over here that opens into the gathering space, and so you can have food in there. Next slide, please. Then there's a whole gallery and museum space that we're not going to build because we did it kind of wrong, because they asked us to do the concept design before we ever talked to them, which is super backwards. Next slide. And this is not what they want. It's a beautiful room. However, they did not want a museum space. They actually wanted all of the artifacts to be distributed throughout the facility, adjacent to the classroom. So they're part of the life of the space, part of the learning that goes on. So we're not going to do this, even though it's really beautiful. Next slide. The archives are going to be a lot smaller than this. So this is sort of a little bit modified version. And it's even going to be a little bit more modest yet. But there is a cafe overlooking the space. Next slide. So as you're coming through from having experienced this very intense story and knowledge sharing coming through Shingwakal, you can finally come over here and get your tea and a biscuit maybe, and sort of just ground yourself, because you see all the plant relatives over here and looking out over the forest over there. So this cafe is kind of a little bit in view of the atrium as well. So this is like a space where you can just sort of come back down and calm down. Next slide. And there it is as a whole. Yeah. Next slide. And that's the wonderful wet meadow that Terrence developed. And I think that's it. I hope I didn't go horribly over time. I have no idea how much I talked.
Well, when you talk about the water, like the Crying Rock, and how it was protected by the rain, and that just demonstrates the power of moving, the power of water. And probably there were the tears from those children. Say, no, don't touch that rock. So it's amazing how that power, things intervene, when you least expect it.
It's really true.
So, so now is the time for question and answer. So if you are joining us online and you have questions you would like to be read aloud, please do type those into the Q&A function or the chat box, and we'll make sure those get read out. But we do have some time for some question and answer here from also the people joining us in person. So please raise your hands and ask away.
I don't have a question, I just wanna make a comment. I'm just so happy that I came tonight. My friend Amber Candy invited me and I kinda joked in the car about like, where are we going, what are we doing?
Go to the museum.
I just wanna say how grateful I am, and as an Anishinaabe person, I just cannot believe how much you shared in such a short period of time, especially for folks who are not Anishinaabe and who may not have an understanding of all of these teachings and all the things that you shared. So big thanks to you.
So the teaching lodge is really interesting, and I'm kind of interested in the Midwind Society myself. I'm currently showing at Toronto Metropolitan University School of Architecture.
Oh, cool.
So they're going to incorporate one of my designs in the new Elm Gardens renovation.
Fantastic.
So it's wonderful to see, Indigenous architecture. So I'm really glad I came. So my friend's like, you have to come, and I'm like, okay. I didn't know what it was on, and I'm like, architecture, cool. So yeah, I'm currently talking to architects.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I'll have to come see when is it open?
It's open for the next couple of days. It closes on the 27th, I think. When do you fly back?
Tomorrow, the 26th.
So you might be able to see the last day of it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So it's at TMU.
Yep.
Whereabouts? Like on
325 Church. It's the Paul H. Cocker Gallery.
Okay.
So it's in the School of Architecture.
All right. Okay. I'll remember Cocker.
Cool.
Your t-shirt will help me.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm always a little not sure if it's how much is right to share, because of course a lot of these teachings are best if you do it in ceremony, if you learn these things in ceremony, if you hear them from elders, that's the best way. So I've just touched on a lot of things, so I hope what I have shared is appropriate, but these are teachings that have been gifted to me, so I figured I'll just pay it forward. Yeah, because they're so valuable and so powerful and so important to know. And they've been hidden from Canada for so long. This is, people who live here, this is part of your heritage too. I mean, it's Anishinaabeg people's, intellectual property or whatever. But the thing is, if you're living here, you need these teachings. We need to share them, because I think they're what's going to lead to the next step in our development. I always say, we've been living in mom's basement for too long, we've kind of been mooching off of mom and just not really doing anything ourselves. And we have to start taking responsibility for ourselves and giving back to mom, because she needs us to take care of her now. And these teachings are how we do that. It's how we start taking responsibility.
When will we see this beautiful design of yours actually realized?
Well, we're hoping to start construction next year. That's still the plan. Yeah, it will be revised from the very aspirational conceptual plan. So we're in the works of doing that, but we're going to retain all of these really important principles that I've shared tonight. So it might look a little different, but we're hoping to retain as much of those principles. They're, I think, the core values of the building.
It's always a journey.
Oh yes.
What about the building in Ottawa?
That I have much less idea about. No clue about that one. The thing is that I think they need to, fund the facility first and figure out how much they have to work with, and I have no idea. The other political, challenges of that were that the gift was given to AFN, so Assembly of First Nations, Métis National Federation, and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. So those three people. But Ottawa is founded on unceded land for which there is no treaty governing the inhabitation of that land. So by international law, you could argue it's there illegally. So like they didn't name Algonquin Nation in the gift or consult with them before giving the gift. So it's a little bit ironic, you know. Here you go, Indigenous peoples, and it's sort of like not really theirs to give. So understandably, Algonquin Nation was like, what are you doing? You know, and they're like, oh, but you're included in Assembly of First Nations. Assembly of First Nations will figure it out with you, what your role is in this whole building and habitation. So that's been a sticking point, as you might imagine. And in fact, on the day when we were meant to unveil this concept design, which was honestly, it was just meant to be aspirational, like, here, imagine what you can do with the space. Because when you look at the building, you can barely even imagine how Indigenous people could ever find a home there. And so this was just meant to get people's creative juices flowing, get the possibilities out there. When we were gonna unveil the design, the chief of Winnipeg showed up and built a lodge and lived there for a few weeks to sort of protest basically that this is unceded territory. This is still Algonquin Nation territory. And so we decided it would be in poor taste to unveil this beautiful new design without their, 100% backing. So we didn't, and AFN made that call, and I think it was the right call. So yeah, it's still posted on their website, so you can go and look at it in detail if you're curious. We translated it into all three languages. It's in English, French, and Anishinaabekwe. So we thought that was really important. And actually the whole process of doing the translation was a real learning experience for me because I'm not a language speaker, though I know I'm trying to learn pieces as much as I can. And Marianne Corbière from University of Sudbury helped us out with the translation. And when we were doing the translation into Anishinaabekwe from English, we realized that you can really hedge in English. Like you can talk around a subject, you can hint at things, but in Anishinaabekwe, you have to say what you mean. You actually have to say what you are doing. Very literally. And so it actually sort of reflected back into the English writing too, because we tried to be more straightforward with what we were up to. And it was a big learning experience for me because I'm like, in Anishinaabekwe, you kind of have to tell the truth. So it's really good to know, and I want to learn more of that language. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this afternoon, you honored us with a tour of the pavilion at Chippewa Park.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the words I remember you using quite often was wow. Can you elaborate to us what you saw in terms of more traditional Indigenous design work in that building?
Yeah, it was a real treat to see that building and to know it was designed by Chief John Thunder. Now I don't have a whole lot of slides on Roundhouse, but I did see some Roundhouse principles there, even though it's like a rectilinear building, which is not, round, obviously. You still see the round wood structure. So the wood hasn't been sliced into square pieces. It's left round. And interestingly, I found out that engineering-wise, it's stronger that way because the little individual strands that make up wood hold together like a whole bunch of laminated straws. And when you slice the straws, what's left gets a little weaker because the straws at the edge are cut. So when you leave the tree whole like that, you actually get more strength out of it. And so we love to see just peeled logs, like those beautiful peeled logs. And actually the roundhouse I'm doing in my home community of Lac Seul First Nation has these beautiful, absolutely gloriously lovely wood columns that are round wood columns. And then in roundhouse, like if you want to check out a very classic, done according to pre-contact traditions, roundhouse, you can see Rat Portage's roundhouse. It's really gorgeous, and it's done 100% with wood, round wood. It doesn't even have any metal in it. It's all joinery. So I was really fascinated with the joinery that I was seeing in that facility. They did use nails, looks like there's metal pieces holding them together, but the joinery looked really familiar to me, and maybe similar to what you would see in like the logs when you stack them into facets. They're notched so that the logs come together and hold on to each other. And then the other thing you see and you'd see it in the Rat Portage, a roundhouse also, is the roof beams come out radially from these four, the middle bay, which is a rectangle, or it's a square actually. It's a square in the center with 4 columns. 4 beams go on top of that square, and then out radially in a roundhouse, you come these roof beams. And I was sort of reminded of that in that building, because while the walls aren't round, obviously, you still get that round wood pattern of beams and purlins that are coming. So, so the joinery, the round wood structures, and definitely the light from above. So in a roundhouse, you always have this higher level where you have windows in it, and light is coming in those windows. And that's to represent our connection to sky, the sky world. And like part of that is so when you smudge, the smudge can get to our bird relatives who will carry it all the way to the spirit realm, which is part of their role to help us out. And so seeing those windows and how beautiful the daylight was coming in from above. And of course, in all our lodges, because of the smoke hole, you get this beautiful light from above filtering through the space. So it's a very comforting and familiar feeling for us to have light coming in high like that. And so yeah, I was sort of reminded by that of the roundhouse clerestory level, the window level up high.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, and you've been wonderful. You've laughed at my jokes. So. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Eladia.
Pleasure.
So if you enjoyed tonight's presentation and you are not a member of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society, you could probably do something about that on your way out at the front desk or by visiting our website at thunderbaymuseum.com. Also, don't forget to visit the gift shop on your way out or come back and visit it this holiday season for your gift buying needs. So I'd like to thank the Lakehead Department of History for funding of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society's lecture series. I'd also like to thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation for their support, and of course a thank you to our staff and volunteers who make events like tonight possible. Especially thanks to Sarah Silvestri and Sydney Balluz back there who've been working through all the technology and trying to keep things moving and try to keep that black screen from appearing on this up in front of us. So thank you for all their help tonight. So do look at our upcoming events calendar. On the 12th of November from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., the museum is hosting our next holiday market. And with vendors from across the region. In addition, if you or a loved one have a school-aged children, the museum is having another PA Day camp on the 18th of November. So please do sign up your kids early and often for that. As also on the 22nd of November, our next lecture in partnership with the Thunder Bay Military Museum will be George Romick presenting on POW art made in Northwestern Ontario. So with that, please don't be shy about the coffee, tea, and refreshments, and have a great rest of your night. Thanks again.